When Lila left the party that night, she had no idea that the drive home would be her last free moment for a very long time. She had spent hours with her friends at a downtown club, dancing away the week's stress. It was late, nearly 2 in the morning, and the streets were quiet, illuminated only by the orange glow of streetlights. Lila felt her phone buzz with a message from her friend Cassie. Checking to make sure she had made it to her car safely, she texted back, "Yep, just got in. I'll see you tomorrow," before slipping the phone into her purse and starting the engine. She didn't notice the van idling down the street. As she pulled onto the main road, her mind drifted back to the night's laughter, the carefree moments with her friends. She was only a few blocks from home when the headlights appeared behind her, too close, casting a harsh glare into her rearview mirror. She squinted, trying to make out who it was, but the lights were blinding. She waved her hand dismissively, hoping they'd back off. They didn't. Instead, the car inched closer, bumping her rear bumper slightly. Panic started to creep in, her hands clenching the wheel as she accelerated. But the car stayed close, its lights practically pressing into her. Then, out of nowhere, she heard the sickening sound of metal against metal as the car rammed her from behind. Her car lurched forward, and she fought to keep control, heart pounding wildly. She took a sharp right onto a side street, hoping to lose the vehicle. But it followed her, relentless. "Just get to a public place," she muttered to herself, desperately searching for somewhere open. But at this hour, everything seemed deserted, and the silence of the street felt crushing. She barely had time to react as the van swerved in front of her, cutting her off. She slammed on the brakes, her car screeching to a stop. She fumbled for her phone, but before she could dial, a figure emerged from the van, and her car door flew open. A masked man grabbed her wrist, dragging her out of the car despite her screams. "Help, someone, please!" she cried, kicking and twisting. But the street was empty, her pleas swallowed by the silent night. The man shoved her into the van, her head hitting the hard floor as he slammed the doors shut. The engine roared to life, and they sped away, leaving her car abandoned on the dark street. Lila awoke to complete darkness, her head throbbing and her hands bound. The musty smell of damp concrete filled her nostrils, and the chill of the room seeped into her bones. She struggled against the ropes digging into her wrists, her heart racing as memories of the abduction flooded back. Where was she? How long had she been out? Footsteps echoed from somewhere outside, and she froze, her breath caught in her throat. A door creaked open, and faint light spilled into the room. A man's silhouette appeared in the doorway, tall and menacing, his face hidden in the shadows. He stepped closer, his boots heavy against the floor. She could see him more clearly now. His face was masked, but his eyes gleamed with a sick, cold amusement. "I'm sure you have questions," he said, his voice low and chilling. "But the only thing you need to know is that no one's coming for you." He walked over to her, squatting so his face was level with hers. She could see his eyes now, cold and dark, devoid of any empathy. "You'll learn to listen, to behave, because if you don't..." He pulled a knife from his pocket, the blade glinting in the faint light. Lila whimpered, shrinking back, but there was nowhere to go, no escape from this nightmare. She nodded, the only thing she could manage, her whole body trembling. Satisfied, the man stood up and backed out of the room, leaving her in darkness once again. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Lila tried to keep her mind focused, to avoid the panic threatening to consume her. She strained her ears, listening for any sound, any clue about where she was. Occasionally, she'd hear voices, muffled but sharp, as if someone was arguing in the distance. And then, one day, or was it night, the door opened, and a different man entered. He was younger, his face uncovered, his eyes darting around nervously. He set a tray of food on the floor beside her, his hands shaking. "Please," Lila whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "You don't have to do this. You can let me go." The man looked away, avoiding her gaze. I'm sorry," he mumbled, backing out of the room quickly. But she saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes, a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could be her way out. Over the next few days, Lila tried to connect with him each time he brought her food. She learned his name, Tom, and that he was scared, caught up in something far beyond his control. And slowly, she began to wear him down, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. One night, when he came to bring her dinner, she asked him again, her voice soft and pleading, "Please, Tom, help me. I know you don't want to do this." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before looking back at her. "They'd kill me if they found out," he whispered. "Then we'll go together," she urged. "Just let me out. We can escape together." Tom bit his lip, his eyes filled with uncertainty. But after a tense moment, he nodded, pulling a small key from his pocket and unlocking her handcuffs. "Be quiet," he warned, helping her to her feet. "We have to move fast." They crept down the narrow hallway, past rows of locked doors, each one hiding horrors she didn't want to imagine. The building was cold, silent, the kind of silence that felt like a trap. Just as they reached the exit, a voice echoed from behind them. "Where do you think you're going?" Lila froze, fear turning her limbs to stone. Her captor stood at the end of the hallway, his eyes blazing with fury. Tom pushed her forward. "Run!" he shouted, charging toward the man in a desperate attempt to buy her time. Lila ran, her legs barely able to keep up with her racing heart. She burst out of the building and into the woods, the cold night air biting her skin. She stumbled over roots and branches, her lungs burning as she pushed herself to keep going. Behind her, she heard the sounds of a struggle, a scream, and then silence. She didn't stop, didn't dare look back. Her mind was focused only on one thing, getting as far away as possible. After what felt like hours, she emerged from the trees and onto a road. She waved her arms wildly as a car approached, relief flooding her as it pulled over. A woman rolled down the window, her face filled with concern. "Are you okay? What happened?" "Please," Lila gasped, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I was kidnapped. I need to get to the police." The woman nodded, helping her into the car and driving her to the nearest police station. She relayed everything to the officers, her voice steady, despite the terror still pulsing through her veins. They assured her they would investigate, that she was safe now. But as she sat in the waiting room, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that her captor was still out there, watching, waiting. Months passed, and Lila tried to move on, to rebuild her life. She went to therapy, spent time with friends, tried to reclaim a sense of normalcy. But the nightmares never stopped, and she always felt like she was being watched. Then, one night, as she walked home from work, she noticed a car following her, its headlights glaring in the darkness. She picked up her pace, heart pounding, but the car matched her speed, staying just behind her, and in that moment, she realized the horrifying truth. She had never escaped. She was still his, still trapped in his twisted game. As the car pulled up beside her, the window rolled down, revealing the same cold eyes that had haunted her every night. He smiled, a smile that promised she would never be free. And as he reached for her, she knew that this time, there would be no escape.